right, hey y'all, welcome to Prior Approvals and Budget Revisions. My name is Catherine Calderon. I'm the Research Administration Manager in OSP for Team 3, and we handle School of Public Health.
I'm Caitlin Myrn. I'm a Sponsored Project Specialist, and I work with Catherine.
Okay, so today we're just going to cover a couple of topics over here. We're going to talk about prior approval requests, not just the prior approval requests in general, but also the specific form that you need to use. We're going to talk about the research terms and conditions prior approval matrix. And then finally, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite subject, the budget revisions and how to calculate one accurately.
Awesome. So we're going to get started with the PAR forms, prior approval request form. You can find this on the OSP website. So this will just give kind of an overview about how to request that. So what is a prior approval request? It's an unanticipated change to a project. So this will happen after the project has been awarded and set up. We also have that policy on there, so you can kind of look more in depth about what exactly is a prior approval request. So the prior approval requirements really depend on the sponsor and the project. So to find out what actions need a prior approval request, you're going to want to look at the terms and conditions of the award and also guidelines. In order to approve a prior approval request, there's two ways. One is some actions can be done internally by OSP, and then some actually require sponsor approval. So OSP is the one at the end of the day who's going to say, okay, yep, OSP can approve this, or actually we do need to go back to the sponsor and ask for that approval. So what kinds of actions may require prior approval request? If you feel like you want to shout some out, go for it. Otherwise, I'll show some on the screen. Any prior approval requests you've worked on? No cost extension? Yeah, awesome. So there's definitely a bunch. I'm just going to throw some up on the screen. This is also in the OSP policy. I'll name out a couple. So equipment purchases, foreign travel, change in scope, no cost extension, pre-award spending, and then there's a lot of other ones that could be a prior approval request. So in order for OSP to process a prior approval, we do need the PAR form to be submitted to OSP. So even if it's something that OSP can internally approve, we still need that PAR form. So for example, if NIH, you want to do a no-cost extension and you already know you can just go into the system and approve it, we don't need to ask the sponsor. You still need to submit that PAR form for OSP to get that process started and submitted in the system. And then sometimes, like I said, with NIH, there's a sponsor portal, and that's how we request that prior approval. But also, sometimes it can just be an email from an AOR or an SPS to the sponsor to get that approval. Exactly. So if an email is needed, we'll send out that email. We're going to get into later if kind of the PI or a technical person wants to request it, what to do in that situation and how OSP can help. So we're just going to do a quick true false so you can show true and false. A PAR form is not required when the prior approval request doesn't require sponsor approval. True or false? Awesome. You got it. So even if the sponsor doesn't need to be contacted, we still need that PAR form.
How did the online folks do?
So online we have 89% off and 11%.
Awesome.
All right.
They're delayed, but correct. All right, and then here's just a picture of the PAR form. A lot of department folks already are seen this before. They're pretty comfortable with it. If you're newer, this is what it looks like. This is just the process. The department completes all components of the form. Any documentation, please send it with the form. And then this might be a change, but try to send it to the OSP front desk, sponsored programs at UNC. That way the OSP front desk can set up a RAM tracker and assign it to the sponsored project specialist, and it won't get lost in the email, like if someone's out of town or anything like that. The prior approval request form, so we just want to bring your attention to a couple different places. So the department is the one who is choosing in box number 3 if it requires sponsor approval or not. So that's in box number 3. And then in box number 4, the red box is going to show you based on the question, based on number 3, what you actually need to send with the PAR form. So are there any questions about that? No, that can be a little tricky to figure out what box you're supposed to actually be following. And then also on the PAR form, just to call it out, number 6 is just a quick space for a justification. This doesn't take the place of a justification letter. It's for internal purposes. So we do ask that you fill out that box on the PAR form as well. And then if a justification letter is required, it should be sent as a separate document along with that PAR form to OSP. And then if you can, try to make sure it's on department letterhead. Sometimes it needs PI signature, sometimes it needs an AOR signature, and that your SPS can help you figure out what you need. And then here's a frequently asked question we do get for that question number 3, like, do we know who needs to approve this? Is it OSP or is it the sponsor? So I don't know if this prior approval request needs sponsor external approval. What should I do as a department grants manager? Here are some tips that we have in OSP. Choose the prior approval action on the PAR form because some actions do require external approval no matter what. So there's certain things like a change in project scope that OSP can't approve without the sponsor. You can consult the award and the sponsor guidelines. You can reach out to your SPS, or you can just use your best judgment to mark that number 3, and then your SPS can reach out if that needs to be adjusted. And then this is very similar, but how do you know if an action requires prior approval request? Award terms, agency guidelines, Catherine's next topic, the research terms and conditions, prior approval matrix. And then again, just use that OSP PAR form because that can also give you some extra information of if the sponsor needs to approve it. And our next topic.
Okay, so how familiar are you all with the research terms and conditions prior approval matrix? If I could just get some form of a thumb. Okay, I feel like it's about 50-50. I thought it was a full, maybe not. There we go.
So you have no idea. A lot of people are saying that they're unfamiliar. Now it's about 51% unfamiliar, 30% familiar.
Oh, this is going to be riveting for you all then. All right, let's see. Okay, so just a little bit of background on what the research terms and conditions is created by the Federal Demonstration Partnership to Reduce Administrative Burden. That phrase might be like hilarious to some of y'all that are like, I have not seen a reduction in administrative burden, but okay. But the FDP is basically a group of federal agencies and institutions and universities that all work together to try and just make our lives just like a teensy bit easier. So they came up with this prior approval matrix, which is Appendix A of the research terms and conditions. And it kind of gives you some guidelines for when you're going to need prior approval for an action. It's important to remember that research terms and conditions apply only to federal grants. Okay, so like we said, there are some things you can do without prior sponsor approval if the research terms and conditions apply. If you're not sure like what applies, this is a good sort of order of precedence pyramid that you can look at. So for example, look at my notes here. So you're going to start with the uniform guidance. If you've got a federal grant, if you've got a federal contract, you'll start with the FAR. Let's see. Okay, an agency might have special terms and conditions on top of that. So if we think about NSF's prohibition on cost share, NIH salary cap, that kind of thing. On top of that, you've got the program itself. So if you have an NIH-K award, which is a career award, there might be PI effort requirements. Then you've got the actual award, which has its own terms and conditions that take precedence over everything else. So these things can be what is the word I'm looking for? They can be in conflict with each other, but you want to go with the strictest one as like the one that applies. And then you can kind of see off to the side, you've got public law and institutional policies. So like if NIH says it's okay, but UNC doesn't, that's something to be aware of. We still want to incorporate those institutional policies into what we're doing. Okay, so the ability to kind of do things without asking first is called expanded authority. This is codified in the Uniform Guidance under the research terms and conditions. An example of expanded authority would be like having an automatic carryover of unobligated balances where you don't have to ask to carry it over into the next budget period. Okay, so to use the prior approval matrix, and it's located on the NSF website, you're going to find your sponsor, find the action that you want to do, and then you're going to look over and see, is approval required or is approval waived? There might be a footnote or like a little asterisk next to required or waived that's going to tell you that it can be overridden by a special term or condition of the award. Okay, so this is what the prior approval matrix looks like. You probably can't see it very well. It's very tiny. Okay, so we're talking about an NSF award. So you're gonna go find NSF on the top row. And then you wanna do a one-time no-cost extension. So all the way at the bottom, initiate a one-time extension. And it says, let's see, waived. So for NSF, we can do a one-time, so first time, no cost extension without asking NSF. That doesn't mean that like the PI is just like, you know, Michael Scott, I declare bankruptcy. Like you're not just like, okay, well, I got an extension. It's like, well, you still have to do stuff in the system to like let NSF know, but we don't actually have to ask them. Okay, so for an NIH award, we're gonna go find NIH. And this is carry forward of an unobligated balance. So this one says waived. So prior approval is waived, but there's like a little number. Yeah, there's a very little number there that says basically there might be a special term or condition in the award that you need to take a look for. Yes, so if you just Google like NSF research terms and conditions, it should pop up. And it's just, I think NSF maybe like drew the short stick as far as like where it's housed. Like it's not exclusive to NSF. It's for a multiple numbers of agencies that use this, but it's just housed on the NSF website. All right, we've got our next poll. So true or false, the research terms and conditions prior approval matrix is applicable to all awards. Lots of thumbs down. Whoops. It's not quite the right question. That's okay. We'll just roll with it. So I saw mostly thumbs down, which is great. The research terms and conditions prior approval matrix is applicable only to federal grants, not industry, not foundation, not federal contracts, just federal grants. Okay, so I think this is question 3 now.
Okay, so maybe.
I think it was this one should be your question 3 because it's our question 4.
Okay, the authority.
Yes.
Okay, there.
All right, true or false? The authority in the RTC prior approval matrix can be overridden by a term or condition in the award. True or false? True. Let me find my true person. There she is. Yes, this is true. So remember your pyramid, right? So like the prior approval matrix is your agency guidelines. And then you continue go up the approval pyramid until you get to the most restrictive, and that can be the award. So if the award says no, but the prior approval matrix says yes, your answer is no. All right, we're going to shift into no cost extensions here pretty quickly. So I think you guys are probably all fairly familiar with what a no-cost extension is. We also call them NCEs if we're typing it out. Basically, the PI needs more time to complete the original scope of work. So they don't need any more money. They're not changing the scope, and we're allowed to do it. Those will all be things that you want to check for before you try to initiate a no-cost extension. Okay. An allowable reason for a no-cost extension. The science is not complete. An unallowable reason for a no-cost extension. I have money left. I haven't spent it yet, but I did all the science. Not okay. Oh, this is a fun one. Okay. The PI is already talking to their technical or program lead. Can the PI request the no-cost extension instead of OSP? How do we feel about this? Nice. Mostly no's. No?
92%.
Okay. See if this will work. Like, I get it. The PI is going to be talking to their counterpart at the sponsor, and they're probably at some point going to have the conversation of like, we're not actually done yet. Like, is there anything we can do about this? I get it. PI is talking to counterpart at sponsor. Sponsor says, yeah, go for it. They forward that to OSP. OSP can't accept that, unfortunately. So now OSP has to go to the administrative contact of the award and say, hey, is this okay? Like, administratively speaking, the PI nor the PI's counterpart of the sponsor, they do not have authority to issue or request a no-cost extension. So even if they've already had this conversation before, and the PI is going to be like, well, I already got approval for it, so it's fine. It's not, they don't have authority to get approval for it, unfortunately. They might not agree, but we do need to kind of cover ourselves and actually get the official approval from the sponsor to do a no-cost extension. All right, we are on to budget revisions, which is Caitlin.
All right, so we're doing money stuff, math stuff. All right, so a budget revision, when it is needed is if there's unanticipated needs or other post-award changes. Again, I put the policy up there. It gives way more information about budget revisions and when they're needed. We do need a really sound justification for budget revisions. The reason that's needed is for audit purposes. Also, another thing, I think lots of people know this, but at the end of a project, we don't do cleanup budget revisions. So we don't say, oh, we didn't spend here, let's move it over. That's not something we do. So this is a big question that comes from departments, but is a budget revision allowed? So there's a lot of different things we can look at to figure out if a budget revision is allowed. A big one is the award guidelines. A lot of times, like federal agencies, they'll be really explicit, like you can rebudget or you cannot. Another thing we want to look at is sponsor guidelines, and then of course the prior approval matrix if it's a federal award, because that will give us some good information. And then just an FYI that sometimes there's rebudgeting thresholds, like 25% of the total award. That's cumulative for the life of the award. So just keep that in mind if you're doing multiple budget revisions. So it's a little tricky because there's two forms, but if sponsor approval is required to do the budget revisions, you're going to want to complete the prior approval form, the form we talked about at the beginning. If sponsor prior approval is not needed, then you can just fill out a separate form, budget revision form, also on the website. Again, OSP is always going to be checking the award and the guidelines, so it could happen. You might not think you need sponsor prior approval, but OSP might say, actually, we do need it. We need you to fill out the PAR form with your budget revision. So this is specific to the PAR form, but this is how to generate a budget revision on your PAR form. So for question number 5, you're going to click yes. This will add another page to the bottom of your PAR form, and this will allow you to actually do the budget revision right on the PAR form itself. And then some helpful tips will appear about how to do a budget revision. I won't read them all out, but this just gives you some good ideas. This is also going to be in our presentation, kind of how to do the budget revision. Another good step to figure out if sponsor approval is needed for your budget revision is to look at your designated restriction code. It's also just called your rebudgeting code. You've probably seen this if you're in the department looking at awards. But there's 3 kind of designated restriction codes, and that's how you can revise the budget. So there's 000, which is no rebudgeting or a very low threshold for rebudgeting. 001, it's no one really said it in the award, so it's a little tricky. And then 005, rebudgeting between those categories. So one FYI I do want to say, 000 doesn't mean that you can't rebudget in all circumstances. It just means there's a lot lower threshold than 005. So if the budget code is 000, this indicates more investigation is needed by the SPS to determine the allowability of this budget revision. So the SPS is going to be doing things like checking the award, checking the guidelines to determine if we can do this budget revision. If the designated restriction is 005, which means rebudgeting is allowable and you can go ahead, the SPS is still going to be checking the award and the guidelines. This is just because there are certain budget revision restrictions. You may have seen this in award, like you can't rebudget this category, or there's a budget revision threshold, like you can only rebudget up to 10% of your award. There's a lot of things to keep in mind with budget revisions. I know we're going pretty quick, but also this will be up to kind of look at and refer back to. But another thing to keep in mind with budget revisions is Connect Carolina. So one thing, the project ID has to be active and open. It can't be ended when you do your budget revision. The project ID must have a positive balance, and then the actual individual account codes, this can get tricky, they have to have a positive balance as well. So this is tricky because InfoPort runs a day behind Connect Carolina, so sometimes you'll submit a budget revision, and then it will take a day for those changes to show up. And so we might be waiting a day to figure out if there's a positive balance in that account code. We did want to give a couple examples of budget revisions. So the tricky thing about budget revisions is how F&A is calculated. This is really the main issue we see with budget revisions, is just certain categories take F&A and then certain categories like equipment do not. So we wanted to give some math for how you can kind of determine this when you're working with account codes that don't take F&A. So in this example, we want to take $3,000 out of equipment and put it into personnel. The F&A for the project is our standard organized research, 55.5%. So the first step for this sort of budget revision, you're going to want to calculate the indirect costs that will be needed in order to transfer these funds. So you're going to start with the $3,000 you're taking out of equipment, and then you're going to actually calculate the indirect costs that you'll also need. And that's where we get that $1,665 amount. Then what you're going to do is whatever money you're taking out of that non-F&A account code, $3,000, you're going to add the indirect costs you'll also need to be taken into account. And that's what you're going to place in your budget revision. So you'll actually be moving $4,665 into personnel. I was a teacher, so I feel like when everyone is just staring, maybe they don't understand. So feel free to give a thumbs up, thumbs down. Your question. Sure. Like the opposite example? Like if you're moving into that sort of account? I'm gonna go to the second example and then let me see if we can answer that. So this is probably not directly answering your question, but this is when the reverse is happening. When you're taking $3,000 out of the account code that has F&A and then you're moving it into one that does not. So in this situation, you're gonna take $3,000 out of supplies And then you're gonna also be you're gonna divide by 1.555 the F&A. You're gonna come up with $1,929, and then you're actually gonna be subtracting that. So it's kind of the. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I apologize. Alice, do you want to say it again and then I'll repeat it? Your question. Yeah. So I apologize. The question was, if you have a situation where you only know the total dollar amount, how do you figure out the F&A costs that you need when you're doing the budget revision? So we chose these two examples to kind of show when you're working with different different account codes that do or don't take F&A. So these are two examples, but we also have kind of an OSP resource that might also help when you're trying to figure out exactly how to complete your budget revision. Again, you can email me or you can email Catherine with kind of the mathy stuff, because it might be easier to explain with your actual numbers. Yep. That's a great question. Yep. Yep. So the question was, how do we know what account codes actually take F&A? Catherine, do you want to take that question?
Okay, so the best way that I know of to do this, I think there are different ways in like Connect Carolina maybe that you can see this. But Caitlin's going to talk about the budget load spreadsheet that OSP uses to actually load your budgets. And it's got a tab on it that'll show you, like, first of all, the budget load itself is geared towards, like, you put the money into equipment, it's not going to take F&A on it because the spreadsheet knows that it doesn't take F&A. But there's also a tab on it, I think, that has like all the account codes, and it'll say exempt or not exempt.
There's also, if you want to look at the OSP policies, they do kind of list out. There's a policy that talks about indirect costs and F&A, so that's also a good resource if you're not sure, does this account code take F&A or not? Unfortunately, the budget revision, the OSP budget revision form doesn't have this inside the account, like inside the table. So that's another tricky part, is you might think that you've done it correctly, and then it will get to your SPS and they'll say, actually, there's an issue because this right here does not take into account the differences in F&A, if that makes sense. So even if it nets to 0 on the bottom on this form, there might be an issue just based on the account code. So here's our resource. So this is what OSP uses to help us with determining budget revisions and them netting to 0. So it's just a draft budget load format, but all we do is we input the negative funds you're removing, and then input the positive funds wherever you're moving the money to. And the reason why we think this is kind of a helpful resource is because it automatically calculates those indirect costs for you, and it already has the F&A associated with account codes in the spreadsheet, so you don't have to guess, does this take F&A or not? And for example, how you would use this is you would look at the indirect line and you would make sure that that matches up with your budget revision form. So for example, when it says negative $357, you would want to make sure on your OSP budget revision form, it says you're taking away $357 from that account code. And we know this is tricky because we don't have memorized all the account codes that take F&A or not, but given your best guess, looking at this, do we think that this budget revision is correct? And we'll give you a couple little hints, like this account code is for subcontracts less than 25K, which means it does take F&A. Oh, I'm sorry. Feel free to come on up a little closer. And then in Connect Carolina, this money is available. And then it does net to 0 on the bottom of the form. Also, if someone has an idea about why it is or why it isn't, feel free to raise a hand and I can repeat what you've said. You want to say why? So when we're moving money into an account code that takes F&A, as you said, like supplies, we would still need to account for that indirect cost budget. And as you see, it's 0. So we're not taking into account that F&A on that account code. So I don't know if there was a poll on that one, but I gave up the answer. All right. So we also do have some resources. We do want to let you know, you may have already heard this in a different session, but a new OSP website is coming soon. So we do have the links on this presentation. Some of those links might be changing as we get that new website. I believe we have some time for questions.
Okay, so this is related to the threshold for budget revisions over the course of the award. You said it takes place over the lifetime. I am not a post-award person, so I definitely don't know the answer. But so say you have money that you're moving from supplies to, say, subcontracts, and then like 2 years later, you move it from subcontracts back to supplies. Does that but it's totals more than 25% money, but it's like you're kind of went back and forth. Like how does that work? How does that affect the?
I think that's a great opportunity to foster your relationship with your SPS, and have them also foster their relationship with the sponsor. The sponsor probably honestly is going to be like, we don't care. Like you're just going back and forth. But if it's in the award terms and conditions, you might as well just check it out to be safe.
We do have some from the Zoom folks. So the first question is, for the ones like prior approval requests you are saying are waived, we still do the PAR form. Correct. We still do the PAR form even if we don't have to ask the sponsor. And that's for our internal systems to make sure we get those changes completed.
Okay. Is OSP contracting normally trying to negotiate rebudgeting authority when reviewing contracts? Okay. That's a very good question. Trying to think if this is something I think it's probably like a best practice, but since it's not a deal breaker, it might not be something that we're really focused on. But that might be something that we take back to our office and kind of talk internally about, like, maybe we need to try and adjust this a little bit if we can. A lot of times we don't have an option. So a lot of times, like, it's the foundation's terms and conditions. We are not allowed to make changes to them, like that kind of thing. Or like your federal award, like they're not negotiating with us.
Okay, so there's a question in the chat. It says, can you leave it as personnel, or do you need to further break it out into salaries and fringe? I'm sorry, I don't know what the "it" is referring to.
So personnel refers to salaries, and then fringe is a separate account code. So when it says personnel, that does mean salaries.
I'm not sure if it's maybe asking like if you have a limit on how much you can rebudget in and out of personnel. Yeah, because it's personnel, salaries, and fringe, so you have to make sure that those are associated correctly.
So the question is, can you leave it as personnel, or do you need to further break out salaries and fringe? That question was referring to your budget revision example of the program.
When it says personnel budget on this OSP form, that's referring just to salaries, not fringe. So you don't need to break down anything further on the personnel. That's just salary. If you do need to take from fringe, then you would need to add that account code onto the form.
Let me elaborate on fringe. Okay, so fringe is the fringe benefits. If you are ever putting money into personnel, money's going into fringe too. They go together, they go hand in hand. There is on our website a breakdown of what the different fringe categories are. And so it depends on the person's position. So like a postdoc might have a different fringe than a grad student, than a full-time faculty, that kind of thing. So you can get all those and it's like a percentage of effort plus a flat fee. And that'll be on the OSP website.
And I will say for like a budget revision, you don't necessarily need to do that. You could just move from salary on a budget revision when you're just moving from salary to supplies. Is that accurate?
Very late in the day.
Right.
Yeah,
That's true.
They should
That's
always
true.
go together.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
How to rebudget for a no-cost extension. I feel like this is maybe a department thing, because we in the central office don't really have any knowledge of like how, I mean, we know how much money you have left over, we can see it in the system, but we don't know what you need it for. So you might need it for, probably for PI effort, but that's something that the department's gonna have to determine themselves. Hopefully that was a little helpful.
I think a big thing is always before you do a budget revision, if you're not sure, your budgeting authority, it's always fine to reach out to OSP or your SPS and just double check. Cause I think, yeah, that can be, budget revisions, are really dependent on the award and the sponsor guidelines. So it's not always super clear, what rebudgeting authority we might have.
Yeah, so the question was, why, like, basically, why is it wrong? How do you fix it? So we had the three little clues that were like, yeah, that's right, right? So the subcontract CNG only, so that takes F&A. So we've got the subcontracts here, the associated F&A here, right? We looked in Connect Carolina already. We've got that current budget available. Nets to zero, bam, we're done. The problem here is that subcontracts takes F&A and supplies takes F&A. So you've taken it out of indirect cost budget for this project ID. You need to put it back into this project ID. Does that make sense? Yeah, so this is where you have to back into this number, right? So like this equals the 10,767. So that's great. But these two together also have to equal 10,767. And that needs to have money in it. Sorry for everyone online. That was probably not helpful.
All right, so there's a clarification. So do you have tips on how to complete a budget revision form for no cost extension when there might be negative budget?
Okay, so I feel like these might be unrelated things because a no cost extension does not mandate a budget revision. Okay, so that's a good point. So if you are submitting a second no cost extension, which nobody really lets us do on our own, you have to submit a budget to show this is what I've got left and this is how I'm going to use it. Maybe that's what we're talking about here. Okay, so thumbs up, good. Okay. Okay, for no cost extensions, typically the PI has at least 1% effort and all key personnel will typically have reduced effort. You will need to assess what costs you need to finish the project and according to the agreement, reallocate based upon what is allowed. 100% accurate. Yes, thank you, Ashley. So that's talking about how to, like Sandy said, how to like rebudget for a no cost extension, which we said is really kind of on the department to figure out. Okay, what if the fringe is in the negative but not the salary? I just had to do this like a couple months ago and I had to go to Lance and I was like, oh, I'm so baffled. I do not know how to fix this. And I think if I remember correctly, and Lance can correct me because he's in here now. I think it was something to do with like charging the personnel and there was like an indirect cost issue or something too. Like it was something was not balanced out properly when it was charged. Lance is shaking his head no. He said no, thank you. Yeah, so if your fringe is negative and your salary is not negative, something has gone astray. And you're probably going to need to call up your SPS and say, I'm very sorry, we need to do some math together. And hopefully you can figure it out that way. Okay, so it's possible someone was charged who had a higher fringe rate than expected. Like you had you charged a PI instead of a grad student, not that that would happen. So you have a higher fringe rate than you thought you were going to have, and then your budget. So the fringe benefits do change. So start of the fiscal year, start of the calendar year, is that right? Okay. So that might have been what happened to you.
I'll read this out. So for negative budget lines, you have to take these into account for reallocating budget to other lines. You don't necessarily need to budget these to zero, but you do need to factor in that you are in a deficit on one. It will pull budget from the overall project.
Yeah, so we have the resources page. Please feel free to use it. Like Caitlin mentioned, your links are getting ready to change if they are OSP website links. So apologies in advance, but the new website looks super cool. So just, we have the links, but they might not be, I'm sorry? They will not be the same links. The links will change. So you get to make all new bookmarks. And we are both on the OSP website. If you would like to contact us and ask us a specific question, probably would recommend going to your SPS first because they're going to be more familiar with their project. But we are available also if you have questions. Thank you.